In the dead of winter, deep in the Alaskan wild, a brutal howl shattered the silence. Jack, a reclusive former ranger, sprinted through knee-deep snow with only a rifle in hand. His heart pounded, not from the cold, but from the sound he'd just heard. It wasn't the wolves that terrified him. It was Bear's roar. Bear wasn't just a grizzly. He was Jack's oldest companion, rescued as an abandoned cub and raised alongside his other love, Dakota, a golden retriever with a spirit 10 times her size. They were inseparable, a strange family bound by survival and silence. But now something had gone wrong. The wolves had come out early this season, and Dakota hadn't come back from her usual run. When Jack reached the clearing, he froze. Bear stood in a circle of snow-stained red, towering over the lifeless bodies of wolves, and curled at his feet trembling was Dakota. What happened next would change everything. For the past 9 years, Jack Harding had spoken more to animals than he had to people. Ever since retiring early from the ranger service after a wildfire claimed his brother's life, he'd chosen solitude over society. A remote cabin tucked away in the Alaskan wilderness gave him everything he needed: quiet, freedom, and space to disappear. But Jack wasn't truly alone. His family, if you could call it that, was an odd one. There was Dakota, a fearless golden retriever who had stuck with him through everything, and Bear, a full-grown male grizzly he had rescued as a cub during a poaching raid years ago. Bear had been no bigger than a sack of potatoes when Jack found him, whimpering beside his dead mother. Against every law and instinct, Jack had nursed him back to health. He planned to return him to the wild. But Bear never left. People in the nearest town, 40 miles away, still whispered about it. They said Jack had tamed a monster. That it wasn't safe. That one day, the bear would remember what it was. But Jack knew better. Bear was no pet. He came and went as he pleased, sometimes gone for days, sometimes napping in the clearing out back like a great furry boulder. But when he was around Dakota, he was different, gentler, protective. He had grown up beside her, and in their eyes, they were siblings. Something unspoken, primal, bonded them. Jack never questioned it. Until the wolves came. It started with tracks. Deep claw marks in the snow. Circles of urine marking territory. Jack had seen it all before, how wolf packs moved in during early winter when food grew scarce. They avoided humans. But dogs? They were fair game. Dakota had her patterns: patrol the woods, chase squirrels, swim in the stream when it wasn't frozen over. She always came back. Until one night, she didn't. Jack stood at the edge of the cabin porch, wind howling, rifle in hand. He called her name into the darkness until his voice cracked. Still nothing. Then a sound rolled out from the valley, low, guttural, thunderous. A roar. Bears. Jack's boots punched through snow as he ran, heart pounding. He moved fast, rifle ready, every sense tuned to the wind. Then he saw the clearing. Bodies. 3 wolves, lifeless and bloodied, lay sprawled like discarded shadows. Tufts of fur scattered in the snow. In the center stood Bear, his massive body heaving with breath, a deep gash on his shoulder leaking crimson. And curled beneath him, trembling, muzzle bleeding, was Dakota. Jack rushed forward, kneeling beside her. Hey, I've got you." Dakota whimpered weakly, licking his hand. Her leg was torn, ribs bruised. She had fought, but wouldn't have survived alone. She survived because Bear had come for her. Jack looked up at the grizzly. Bear met his eyes and grunted softly, then stepped back into the shadows, letting Jack tend to his wounded dog. What Jack didn't know was this was only the beginning. Because what happened in that clearing had triggered something far older than instinct. Something that would challenge every rule Jack had lived by. Something that would turn Bear and Dakota from companions into legends. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of firewood and the soft, irregular breaths of 2 wounded souls. Dakota lay on a thick bed of old blankets near the hearth, her side wrapped with gauze. Jack had cleaned and stitched her wounds carefully, but the bite marks on her leg were deep. She needed rest, possibly antibiotics. He made a mental note to radio in for help, though he already knew the trail to town was blocked with snow. Bear lay by the front door, his body coiled but watchful, a streak of dried blood running down his flank. Jack had managed to clean the gash on his shoulder, but Bear didn't seem to care about pain. His eyes never left Dakota. He had fought for her. Killed for her. Jack had no doubt about that now. That night, sleep came in fragments. Jack stirred often, haunted by the image of the wolves closing in. He'd seen enough death in his time, human and otherwise, but this had been personal. And the more he thought about it, the more questions clawed at his mind. Why had Bear intervened? Grizzlies don't usually fight wolves unless provoked. But Bear had arrived before Jack did, as if he knew something was wrong. Jack sat up and rubbed his face. Could it have been instinct? Or was it something more? He looked at Dakota, her chest rising and falling slowly. And Bear, silent as a sentinel, watching over her still. In the morning, Bear was gone. Jack found fresh prints outside the cabin leading into the trees. He wasn't worried. Bear often came and went. But this time felt different. The trail veered sharply west, toward the ridgeline where the wolves had first appeared. And there were more wolf tracks now. Bigger. More organized. Jack's gut twisted. He wasn't just dealing with a rogue pack. This was something coordinated, perhaps even territorial. A new alpha could have taken over. Or worse, a starving superpack pushing through the winter. And Bear had gone alone. Hours passed. Dakota whimpered in her sleep, legs twitching, haunted by dreams only she could see. Jack fed her broth and whispered soft words, but her tail didn't wag like it used to. Evening settled in with a grim chill. And then, just before midnight, Bear returned. His coat was darker with mud and dried blood. His eyes were wild. But he wasn't wounded. Not this time. He stood in the doorway and growled softly, not in pain, but in warning. Jack knew that sound. The wolves were coming back. Jack moved quickly. He loaded his rifle. Checked his fuel. Locked the outer shutters. Pulled Dakota's bed closer to the fire. "Stay close, girl," he murmured. "We're not alone tonight." Bear paced by the window, rumbling low, his ears twitching at every snap of ice outside. Then it came. A long drawn-out howl, answered by two more closer. Too close. The wolves had returned. And this time, they weren't just hunting for food. They were hunting for revenge. The forest was alive with sound. Wolves howled from the ridgeline, their voices echoing like a war drum through the valley. They were circling now, testing the perimeter of the cabin, their calls growing sharper closer. Jack stood at the window, rifle loaded, eyes scanning the snowy dark. He didn't know how many were out there. 4, 6, maybe more. But he knew one thing, they hadn't come for scraps. They had come for blood. And this time, they weren't afraid of the scent of man, or bear. Inside the cabin, the tension was thick as the smoke curling from the fire. Dakota lay curled beside the hearth, ears twitching with each distant growl. Though she was still weak, something in her had changed. She didn't whimper anymore. She was alert now, watchful. Beside her, Bear paced slowly. He paused every few seconds to sniff the air near the doorframe, muscles tight beneath his thick fur. "Easy, boy," Jack muttered. "They're trying to get in your head." But Bear wasn't rattled. He was waiting. For the moment they'd strike. It happened fast. A sudden thud against the back wall. Then another. Claws scraping wood. Growls. The patter of paws rushing past the porch. Jack raised the rifle. "They're flanking." The window beside the kitchen shattered, then a blur of gray fur lunged through the broken frame. Jack fired instinctively, the shot echoing through the cabin. The wolf dropped, yelping. Another tried the back door, only to be met with the roar of a charging grizzly. Bear slammed into it like a freight train, lifting the predator off the ground and hurling it into the snow outside. The creature didn't rise. 2 down. More to go. Dakota rose shakily to her feet. "Stay back," Jack called out, but she didn't listen. Instead, she limped toward the door where Bear stood, her body trembling with effort. But there was no fear in her eyes. There was loyalty. She would fight beside her brother. Even if it killed her. The next attack came at the front. 3 wolves. One leapt for the porch rail. One snapped at Bear's flank. One charged straight for Dakota. Jack couldn't get a clean shot, but he didn't have to. Bear spun and intercepted the closest threat, jaws snapping, body slamming into the porch post. Dakota, despite her injuries, lunged forward with a bark that echoed into the trees and bit down on the leg of the wolf coming for her. Jack fired twice, 2 clean shots, and both predators dropped. Snow sprayed. Blood hissed in the cold. And then, silence. The wolves retreated. The pack was broken. Leaderless. Afraid. Bear stood at the porch edge, chest heaving, blood streaking his fur. And beside him, shoulder to shoulder, stood Dakota. Not as prey. Not as victim. But as an equal. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. Not from fear. But from awe. He watched the firelight dance across the floor where Dakota and Bear now slept together, side by side, bruised but alive. What he had witnessed, what they had done together, it went beyond anything he'd ever seen in nature. It wasn't just instinct. It was devotion. It was love. The morning sun broke through the snow-dusted trees like a promise of peace. Jack stepped out onto the porch, breath steaming in the crisp air. Blood still stained the snow in spots, but the tracks were fading. The wolves had vanished into the forest, defeated, at least for now. Inside, Dakota lay curled up on a blanket with her head resting against Bear's side. She still limped, but her spirit had returned. Her tail wagged weakly when Jack brought her breakfast. Bear, ever the guardian, opened one eye, then closed it again as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." Jack knelt beside them both. "You two," he murmured, "you're legends now." He didn't mean for the story to go public. But a local bush pilot who flew supplies had caught wind of the attack. He'd seen the aftermath: wolf bodies in the snow, a golden retriever with bite marks, a grizzly sitting protectively beside her like a silent sentinel. The pilot snapped a photo. Posted it online. It went viral in a matter of days. People didn't believe it at first. A grizzly saves a dog? Impossible. But then came the second photo. Bear and Dakota, standing side by side outside the cabin, staring down the lens like they knew exactly what it meant. The internet lit up. Hashtag Bear and Dog. Hashtag Unlikely Guardians. Hashtag Wild Best Friends. News outlets called. Wildlife groups emailed. Some wanted interviews. Some wanted to take Bear away. Jack refused them all. He's not a pet. He's not a circus act. He's family. Still, the attention brought something else: offers for funding. People wanted to help. They offered to build a proper shelter, donate food, support veterinary care. Jack considered it. Maybe they could use the support, if it meant keeping Bear and Dakota safe on their own terms. One offer stood out: a non-profit that specialized in sanctuary zones, offering open land for semi-wild rescues. Jack read the proposal 3 times. It was real. 10 acres. Fenced but forested. Freedom, but with protection. A place where Bear and Dakota could roam together. He looked out at the clearing. It was time. The move wasn't easy. Bear hesitated to leave the woods he'd known. Dakota sniffed the truck warily. But Jack promised them it wasn't goodbye, it was home. The first night at the sanctuary, Bear didn't sleep near the trees. He slept beside Dakota, as always, their breath steady, their bond unbreakable. And Jack? He stood under the stars and finally allowed himself to believe something he hadn't in years. That some stories are worth telling forever. Spring melted the snow like a memory. At the edge of the newly built sanctuary, Dakota stood in a patch of sun-drenched grass, her golden coat gleaming. A faded scar stretched down her hind leg, but she walked without a limp now. Her eyes were calm, confident. Across the meadow, Bear lumbered toward her, slow and gentle despite his towering frame. His thick fur rippled in the breeze, and wildflowers bent under his paws. Birds scattered overhead. But Dakota didn't flinch. She ran to him. They nuzzled in greeting, like something ancient remembering its place in the world. Jack watched them from the porch of his new cabin, built just outside the sanctuary fence. He sipped hot coffee, the mug trembling slightly in his scarred hands. He'd seen things most people wouldn't believe. Fire-swallowing trees. Wolves with eyes full of hunger. A bear fighting not to kill, but to protect. And now, every day, he saw something rarer than all of it. A grizzly and a dog, walking side by side. Trusting. Communicating. Surviving. Not by chance. By choice. The sanctuary grew. Visitors came, but only in silence. Jack made sure of that. No tours. No shouting. Only guided walks. Observation decks. Education signs. People learned about ecosystems, predator-prey balance, what wildness truly means, and what it doesn't. No one ever touched Bear. But they all stared in awe when Dakota trotted beside him. One afternoon, a child pointed at them and asked, "How do they know their family?" His mother paused, unsure. Jack, overhearing, simply said, "Because family doesn't have to look the same. It just knows." Years passed. Dakota aged gracefully, her muzzle turning gray. Bear grew slower, his roars softer. But neither strayed far from the other. If Dakota slept by the pine trees, Bear curled up nearby. If Bear dipped his snout in the stream, Dakota stood watch. They were never more than a few steps apart. One morning, Jack found them curled together under the old cedar, the sunrise casting gold over their backs. He didn't disturb them. He simply smiled. Long after Jack was gone, after Dakota had passed peacefully and Bear wandered off into the forest one last time, the story remained. Locals still told it around fires. Of the dog and the grizzly who stood against a pack. Who survived. Who stayed side by side until the end. Their pawprints are still visible in the soft soil near the cedar tree if you know where to look. A small wooden sign stands there now. Inseparable, because some bonds are woven not by blood, but by loyalty.